On August 27, 2025, the global economy jolted as breaking news flashed across screens worldwide. Markets tumbled, investors scrambled, and uncertainty rippled through financial capitals from New York to Mumbai. President Trump had just announced a sweeping 50% tariff on all Indian imports, a move that stunned both allies and rivals. The official reason was clear: India's continued purchase of Russian oil, openly defying Western sanctions and challenging the unity of the US-led coalition. The administration framed this as a moral stand, punishing India for not aligning with US foreign policy. Officials insisted it was about upholding global norms and sending a message to other would-be sanction breakers. The move shocked diplomats and business leaders alike, threatening years of careful US-India partnership built on shared democratic values, economic cooperation, and mutual concerns over China's growing influence in Asia. Instead of nuanced diplomacy, the tariff was a blunt instrument, an ultimatum designed to force India's hand, leaving little room for negotiation or compromise. Washington assumed India's export reliance on the US would ensure compliance, believing economic pressure would quickly bring New Delhi to the table. But this calculation ignored India's long tradition of strategic autonomy and its urgent need for affordable energy to fuel its vast and growing population. For India, energy security was not just policy, it was survival. The tariff risked unraveling a decades-old alliance, turning a complex relationship into a zero-sum confrontation, and raising questions about the future of global partnerships. The 50% figure was meant to be crippling, a show of strength. But economic weapons rarely hit only their intended targets. Collateral damage was inevitable. The fallout would soon ripple far beyond government halls, affecting lives from Iowa's small businesses to Mumbai's bustling markets, touching farmers, factory workers, and families on both sides of the world. This was not just a trade dispute, it was a test of friendship, a challenge to the very idea of a predictable, globalized world, and a stark reminder that in geopolitics, every action has far-reaching consequences. The first casualties of the new tariff policy weren't in distant government offices or foreign capitals. They were right here, in American homes and stores, where ordinary people felt the impact almost overnight. Suddenly, prices shot up on everyday essentials. Everything from generic medicines and over-the-counter drugs, to electronics, clothing, and household goods. These were products that relied heavily on Indian supply chains, and the disruption was immediate and visible. For families already struggling to keep up with rising inflation and stagnant wages, these new costs were more than just an inconvenience. They were a harsh, unexpected blow that made it even harder to make ends meet. The promise of protectionism was supposed to help American workers and industries, but in reality, it made daily life more expensive for millions, squeezing budgets and forcing tough choices at the checkout counter. Immigrant communities, especially Indian American neighborhoods, felt the sting even more acutely. These communities, which often rely on imported goods to maintain cultural traditions, were hit hard by the sudden spike in costs. Family-run shops that imported spices, garments, and jewelry from India faced existential threats as their costs doubled or even tripled. Many owners worried about how long they could keep their doors open. Some had no choice but to raise prices, while others were forced to close entirely, eroding the unique cultural fabric of cities like Edison, Houston, and Fremont, places known for their vibrant Indian communities. The tariff, intended as a geopolitical tool, ended up dismantling the American dream for countless small business owners and the communities they served, leaving behind uncertainty and loss. This wasn't just about economics. It was about the loss of vibrant neighborhoods, the shuttering of beloved local businesses, and the weakening of America's multicultural identity, an identity built on diversity and inclusion. The pain was immediate, personal, and widespread. Families cut back on essentials, worried about the future, and wondered how long they could hold on. The policy that was meant to punish a foreign government ended up hurting American citizens the most, sparking frustration and protests across the country. The true cost of the trade war was visible in shuttered storefronts, strained family budgets, and the growing sense of uncertainty in communities everywhere. The fallout was a daily reminder of just how interconnected and vulnerable our lives have become in a globalized world, where decisions made far away can reshape the fabric of our everyday existence. The economic blowback hit America's core industries, agriculture and technology. What began as a bold move to protect American interests quickly spiraled into a crisis that rippled through the heart of the nation's economy. India, once a top buyer of U.S. farm goods, retaliated with its own tariffs, closing its market overnight. Shipments were halted, contracts canceled, and American exporters suddenly found themselves locked out of a crucial market. Farmers in California and the Midwest saw warehouses fill with unsold crops, prices crash, and years of investment vanish. Many family farms already operating on thin margins faced bankruptcy as their produce rotted in storage, unable to reach buyers. In Silicon Valley, the tech sector suffered as supply chains and talent flows with India were disrupted. Projects stalled, and companies struggled to adapt to the sudden loss of skilled workers and critical components. Indian engineers and R&D centers are vital to U.S. innovation. The trade war slowed projects and raised costs. The collaborative spirit that fueled breakthroughs was replaced by uncertainty and mounting expenses. Startups relying on Indian partners faced higher expenses and delays, stifling innovation. Many young companies, once hopeful, now struggle to survive in a climate of unpredictability and lost opportunity. The tariff, meant to project strength, instead weakened America's most dynamic industries. Factories closed, jobs disappeared, and the promise of growth faded for thousands of workers and entrepreneurs. It was a self-inflicted wound, hurting those least able to absorb the shock. Families, small businesses, and entire communities bore the brunt of a policy that backfired. The irony, what was intended as a show of strength to secure U.S. dominance ended up undermining it, leaving the nation more vulnerable and divided than before. India didn't just absorb the blow, it pivoted. New Delhi accelerated trade talks with the EU, revived dormant deals, and deepened ties with BRICS nations. India doubled down on Russian energy, settling deals in non-dollar currencies, a direct challenge to U.S. financial dominance. Domestically, the government supported affected industries and pushed for self-reliance, seeking new markets in Asia, Africa, and the Middle East. Textile exporters found buyers in Japan and Australia, while pharma and tech firms diversified. The tariff, meant to isolate India, instead spurred it to build a more resilient, multipolar economic future. America's attempt at coercion backfired, accelerating India's strategic autonomy. The world's economic center of gravity shifted, and India emerged more independent than ever. The 50% tariff backfired spectacularly, harming Americans more than it changed Indian policy. Tariffs are taxes paid by importers. Costs passed to U.S. consumers, not foreign exporters. Prices rose, but India found new buyers. American families paid the price. Complex supply chains meant disruptions rippled through U.S. manufacturing, raising costs and reducing competitiveness. Jobs didn't return to America. They shifted to other countries, leaving U.S. workers behind. Strategically, the U.S. alienated a key partner, pushing India closer to Russia and China. The Indo-Pacific strategy was undermined, and America's rivals gained ground. The policy, meant to assert leadership, left the U.S. more isolated and less influential. The deepest wound was the erosion of trust between the U.S. and India. Decades of partnership built on shared values were replaced by suspicion and resentment. Indian students and professionals began looking to friendlier countries, slowing the flow of talent to American universities and tech firms. Indian-American communities felt caught in the crossfire, their businesses and loyalties questioned. Personal relationships between artisans and buyers, families and friends, were severed by the trade war. The damage to trust will take years to repair, if it can be repaired at all. America's reputation for stability and partnership was shaken, making future cooperation harder. The economic pain may fade, but the memory of betrayal lingers, weakening both nations. As the dust settles, the true cost of the trade war is clear. The tariff failed to change India's course, but it fractured relationships, bankrupted businesses, and isolated America. U.S. communities struggled to recover. Indian exporters adapt and diversify. The experience forced India to build a more resilient, independent economy. The lesson is human global economics is about connections, not just numbers. Trade wars break trust, tear communities, and leave the world less hopeful. The real loss isn't just in dollars, but in lost opportunities and broken bonds. In a world that needs bridges, this conflict built walls, and everyone is poorer for it.